3D printing sure is great. You can take a simple roll of plastic filament and make just about anything. The only downside is, while you're watching your prints, you gotta bend over and it hurts your back. If only there was a better way. Oh yeah, there is. We'll make something that's like a part of the ground, but elevated to a height that's easy to work at and easy to view. We'll call it a table. And there's a few criteria out of this table that I'm gonna need to make it the perfect for 3D printing table that we're gonna build. First up, it needs to be heavy duty. 3D printers really need to be a nice solid work surface. Since this print head is moving back and forth so quickly, if the table vibrates with the print head, that can add ringing into your prints, and we're gonna need to avoid that if this is gonna be the ultimate 3D printing table. Number two, I'm gonna need this to be a floating table. Anyone who's done much 3D printing knows you're gonna get little bits and pieces of plastic that break off and are gonna fall on the ground. If you ever print anything with supports, little bits of those supports, they're gonna end up on the ground. So it would be really nice if I can easily clean the ground underneath it, just run the Roomba by and it'll pick it all up. The third criteria is to make this fairly cheap. I already have some materials in the garage and I want to use those as much as possible to minimize how much extra cost I need to put into this. I've got a 4x8 sheet of plywood and some 2x4s, so hopefully it won't cost very much to buy the few extra pieces I need. And the fourth criteria, I do want this table to look good. I put this as fourth because it is the most subjective out of this. If you're gonna be building this in a closet or a garage, maybe a utility shed, wherever you're gonna put it and it doesn't need to look good, this can be very low on your priorities. But for me, since I am gonna be putting it inside, I do want it to look good in the end, so we are going to paint the wood to make it look like a nice looking table. Now that we've got our design criteria laid out, let me go show you the supplies we have and let's get building. And this is about all we need to build the entire table. We've got a 4x8 sheet of plywood, some scraps of 2x4. I did buy some 1x4 sections to be the front and the sides. That's just because buying some sections of 1x4 was cheaper and easier than trying to use 2x4. I did also have to buy some 4-inch screws because we're gonna be drilling through the 2x4, through drywall, into the stud. So I wanna get a nice, solid, secure hold on the wall. So, big screws. So now that we've got all these boards cut, it's nice to have a large, this is an 8-foot workbench, and we're gonna be building an 8-foot table. So time to start spacing out these boards and build the frame. These cross beams are gonna be spaced about 20 inches apart. Make sure you use some sort of square and then just start screwing them together. So now that we've got the frame built, I realized one issue to this is that these were cut on a circular saw instead of a miter chop saw. So some of these aren't perfectly square. But wood, like most things, just needs a little bit of convincing to align perfectly. And luckily wood is fairly flexible, so it's just gonna need a little bit more convincing on some of these cross beams. And I'm gonna put some gloves on for moving these boards around. My hands are not woodworking tough, and this is kind of splintery wood, so moving and shifting things, there's no shame in wearing gloves sometimes. So I made a bit of an oopsie when measuring all these things. I didn't account for the frame on the outside, I just accounted for the top. So for these 1x4s that are gonna go on the side of the frame and on the front, I need to account for there being a 1/2 inch shorter on each side. And also these long 2x4s need to be a 1/2 inch shorter as well. So now I need to take off these side pieces and cut all the ends down a 1/2 inch and cut these end pieces a 1/2 inch on each side. So now it's time for me to take it apart and put it all back together. For me, it should take a little bit of time, but for you, it'll only take a second. And now it's ready. The 1x4 now has a lip here that it can fit under, and there's also a gap at the front for this long 1x4 to fit in there. So now it's time to put together this box of plywood and 1x4s that will fit onto our 2x4 frame. I'm going to be using these shorter 1¼ inch screws to hold this together. And so now on to part 2 of this project. Part 1 is building the box and getting it ready. Part 2 is making it actually look good because it is going inside. If this was for a garage or workshop, I might leave it like it is, or I might put 1 coat of primer on there to hold some of the splinters in. But this is going inside, so I have to make it look good. First, I'm going to put some primer on there and then we're going to paint it. But it's nice that the 2 parts come apart because while this is drying, I can go inside and be mounting the frame on the wall. But first things first, let's get to painting. Well, before you start painting, make sure you do dust everything off. This is a microfiber or any cloth, and get the dust off there, since I did sand it before this. This is just some Kills 2. It's just some primer that I had laying around. So now I've got the frame here on the wall where it's going to go. It's really nice. I've got this standing desk that I'm using to get it to the right height. I'm going to mount it at the height that I have my workbench outside, which is 58.5 inches tall. It's also really nice that this wall already has these outlets pretty much at desk level, so that's going to be perfect to be able to plug things in really easily. I spaced these out so we're going to hit 5 studs across the entire table. So that'll be a total of 10 4-inch screws into studs holding this up. Hopefully that should be strong enough. But before I start mounting things to the wall, Ada wanted to get in the shot. This is the progress of Ada. She's getting quite big. We just took her to the vet yesterday for her final vaccination shot, and she is 30 pounds right now. At 16 weeks, she's 30 pounds already, so she's gonna be around down here helping me out. So if you hear any noise, it's just her. And here we are on the final day, ready to mount this to the wall. I did skip a lot of the finishing steps because there's so many different ways to finish a table or a block of wood, whatever material you're going to be using. And there's probably specific tutorials already on YouTube that will better match your needs. But me, I primed it, sanded it with 220 grit, single layer of paint, and then another sanding, and then a final coat. So it's 2 coats of paint, 1 coat of primer underneath, and a lot of sanding in between. And that gives a really smooth finish to this. For it being just a cheap block of 1/2-inch plywood, it looks really good. And the color we've decided to go with is Benjamin Moore's Gentleman's Gray. We just used their semi-gloss wall paint. It's Regal Select was the specific one we got. The semi-gloss will make it much stronger and easier to wash in the future. Also, to note, I did do a test fit before I put the paint on here because I didn't want to put all the work into finishing this and then try to mount it on the wall and realize I'd mismeasured something. Also, it is on a rolling standing desk by This is just one by Husky that I normally use in all my videos. And it's so nice to have a standing desk. I can just raise it or lower it like that to get it lined up perfectly to slide it on or slide it off. So with this cart, I can just line it up and roll it straight on. Without the inner supports, the top and the bottom sheet of plywood seems to bend and flex a good amount. So you have to go along and pull it apart, slide it on each 2x4. But then once you get it all lined up, you can just start working it in. Pull the cart out of the way. So now that I've got it all mounted up here, it's time for the weight test to see if it can hold my weight in one single position. A little bit of a bend to it, but arms and legs up, it's supporting me, and I'm way heavier than any 3D printer I'm going to be putting up here. So that's a really good sign. And with how much friction there was to force this thing onto the frame, I don't think it needs any screws to hold it to the frame because it's so hard I can't pull it out, and so I don't think it needs some extra screws to mount it like that. And it's not going to have forces like this. All the force that's going to be applied on here is going to be vertical, straight down. But now let's get it all loaded up with stuff to give it a good real-life test. So as of now, I've been using this table for my 3D printer for about a week now, and I've got to say I love it. Overall, it fit all my design criteria. Number one, it was very heavy duty. It supports my weight, it supports the 3D printer, and it prints great. Number two, I love that it's a floating desk because 3D printers create so much little bits and pieces of filament that falls off, so it's really important to be able to clean underneath it. Number three, I was able to build most of it with parts I already had. I did have to buy those 4-inch screws, and the paint, I think, was the most expensive thing that I had to buy for it. And that leads into number four of it looking good. Since I wanted it to look like a good indoor table, I did buy some nice paint for it. But if you're doing it in a garage or a workshop where you really don't care that it just looks like bare wood, you could just sand it flat or use whatever treatment method. There's so many different ways of finishing a table at any budget level. I have been using this table a lot over the last week because I have been switching from PLA to PETG, and I'm making a whole extra video that will cover all the steps you need to do to get from PLA to PETG if that's your first time. There's a lot of little tricks along the way that I've learned that have greatly improved my prints. This Benchy printing right now is coming out amazing. So make sure you subscribe down below so you don't miss that video. Another really nice part of this design that wasn't in the design criteria but ended up being a really nice part of it is how long it is. Right here on the end, I've got it's currently a nice little shot of just the 3D printer, but next to it, I've got my laptop that I have controlling the 3D printer. Next to it, I can stock filament, papers where I can sort of document what I'm changing between prints because I'm doing a bunch of calibration, all my tools, and some dog toys down on the end. There's so much room here to have all your parts easily accessible and right here ready for working with. I do think I will keep upgrading this desk and adding extra features to it, and that will have to come out in a part 2, so make sure you subscribe down below so you don't miss the part 2 whenever that comes out. Currently this is pretty amazing, but I do know there's some changes I can make in the future. But anyway, I hope this video was useful for you, and if you are trying to build a floating desk like this, if you have any questions, just put them in the comments down below and I'll get back to you on that. I hope you guys have an amazing day out there, and I'll see you in the next video.